Welcome to today's deep dive. I want you to picture a material that is literally holding the modern world together.
Oh, yeah. Like everywhere you look.
Exactly. I mean, it stops speeding rifle bullets in midair. It reinforces those massive suspension bridges you drive over.
It even protects the deep sea optical cables that are, probably transmitting this very audio to you right now.
Right. And you would think the discovery of a material that powerful, that world-changing, would look like a scene from some blockbuster movie.
Yeah, like glowing liquids and massive supercomputers.
Pristine, futuristic laboratories, all of that.
Yeah.
But the reality is actually far stranger. The material that changed the world almost ended up washed down the drain.
Simply because it looked like a batch of spoiled, cloudy buttermilk.
It's wild. Today we are exploring the life of Stephanie Kwolek. We're using her comprehensive Wikipedia article as our source map to understand how a woman who really just wanted a temporary job to pay for medical school.
Right, just a temporary gig.
Exactly. How she accidentally stumbled into a 40-year career that revolutionized modern chemistry. The mission of this deep dive is to see what her journey can teach all of us about the immense hidden power of challenging assumptions.
Because Kwolek's story is essentially a masterclass in the value of persistent, hands-on experimentation.
Yeah.
When you really analyze her timeline, you see someone who just refused to blindly accept the standard operating procedures of her era.
Right. She looked closer at anomalies.
She did.
Yeah.
And she absolutely wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty when every institutional voice around her told her, just throw your work in the trash.
Which is such a powerful lesson. But to understand how she eventually upended material science, we kind of have to look at the observational boot camp that was her childhood.
Oh, her childhood is fascinating.
Right. So she was born in 1923 in a Pittsburgh suburb called New Kensington, Pennsylvania, to Polish immigrant parents. And she spent her early years building this really intense foundation of meticulous scrutiny.
Yeah, you see this fascinating dual influence from her parents. Like, her father, John Kwolek, was a passionate naturalist.
And they didn't just take leisurely walks, right?
No, not at all. They spent countless hours in the woods together, but they were actually collecting specimens, observing minute details, and carefully cataloging everything into these highly structured scrapbooks.
Wow.
Yeah. And he passed away tragically when she was only 10 years old, but she directly attributed her rigorous scientific mind to those early days analyzing leaves and insects with him.
That makes so much sense. And then on the other hand, you have the influence of her mother, Mellie, who was a seamstress.
Right.
So Stephanie initially toyed with the idea of going into fashion design. But her mother looked at her and basically said, "You are far too much of a perfectionist to survive a subjective career like fashion."
Which is a pretty blunt thing for a mom to say, but...
Right. But it worked because that prompted Stephanie to pivot toward medicine. She viewed medicine as precise, binary, clean.
It appealed heavily to that need for precision. But her path to get there required just incredible adaptability.
Yeah, like her grade school situation.
Exactly. Her grade school was so small and underfunded that 2 different grades had to share a single classroom.
And most people view a crowded, chaotic classroom as a massive disadvantage. But she turned it into a strategic edge.
She really did.
While she was doing her own work, she would literally listen to the older kids' lessons from across the room. She gathered data from outside her designated zone and eventually outpaced her older peers entirely.
Which is such an early indicator of how she would later tackle complex chemistry.
Right, pulling information from the noise around her.
Exactly. And that relentless drive pushed her to earn a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from Carnegie Mellon University in 1946.
But chemistry wasn't even the end goal for her.
No, the degree was purely functional. She just needed a temporary job in a lab to save up enough money to pay for her medical training.
Which sets up one of the boldest job interviews I have ever heard of.
Oh, this story is amazing.
So she travels to Buffalo, New York to interview at the DuPont company. She meets with William Hale Charch, who is a research director and would actually later become her mentor.
Right.
At the end of the interview, Charch gives her the standard corporate brush-off. He tells her, we'll reach out in about 2 weeks with the decision.
Standard procedure.
Standard procedure. But Kwolek, who was a recent graduate in 1946, looks at this powerful director of a massive chemical company and tells him she actually needs an answer right now.
Because she had another job offer she needed to respond to.
Exactly. It is a staggering display of confidence.
And it paid off immediately. I mean, Church was so taken aback by her directness that he literally called his receptionist into the office and dictated her offer letter right there on the spot.
Wait, while she was sitting there?
While she was sitting right there?
It's incredible. But, this raises a really fascinating contradiction to me. We have a self-proclaimed perfectionist who wants the clean, objective world of medicine. Yet she steps into polymer chemistry at DuPont, which is a field practically defined by messy, unpredictable trial and error. Why did that work?
Well, you really have to look at the macro environment DuPont was operating in during 1946 to understand why she thrived there.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So this is the post-World War II boom. DuPont had introduced nylon right before the war, and business was just exploding. They were rapidly expanding into all these new textile applications.
Right. Everybody wanted nylon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, they had massive vacancies in their research departments because so many men had been overseas fighting.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. So Kwolek walked into this environment teeming with messy, unsolved problems. But solving those problems required exactly her brand of meticulous structural perfectionism.
And the stakes for those problems were incredibly high, right? They weren't just trying to make it like a softer shirt.
Far from it. The company was trying to solve fundamental physics problems of the mid-20th century.
What kind of problems?
One major push was finding a petroleum-based polymer fiber that would be lighter but harder wearing than steel to use in radial tires.
Because heavy steel wiring in tires killed fuel efficiency.
Exactly. And beyond that, the protracted fighting of World War II had exposed a massive vulnerability for the military. Steel was essentially the only armor material available.
Which is fine if you're building a tank.
Right.
But a foot soldier simply cannot wear thick steel plates into battle and still, move around. The military desperately needed something lighter than steel, but harder to break.
Precisely. They needed a material that defied the known physical trade-offs of the era, because usually if you make something lighter, you make it weaker.
Right. That's just basic physics.
But for Kwolek, the intellectual challenge of solving that specific puzzle, re-engineering the fundamental building blocks of matter to create strength without weight, was just intoxicating.
I can imagine.
The polymer research was so compelling that her quote-unquote temporary gap year job morphed into a calling. She abandoned her medical school plans entirely to dedicate her life to chemistry.
Wow. So she stayed at DuPont because she found a puzzle too fascinating to walk away from.
Exactly.
And her research group eventually moves to Wilmington, Delaware in 1950. Over the next decade, she's filing patents and contributing to the development of major products like spandex, Nomex, Captain.
She is incredibly prolific.
But the puzzle that ultimately defines her career wasn't initially about stopping bullets. It was about a completely different global crisis in 1964.
Right, an anticipated gasoline shortage.
Yeah, the logic was straightforward. If gasoline becomes scarce, cars need to be vastly more fuel efficient. And the easiest way to increase efficiency is to reduce the weight of the vehicle.
Starting with the heavy steel used in the tires.
Exactly. Kwolek's group was explicitly tasked with finding that lightweight, incredibly strong replacement fiber.
And so she starts working with these complex chemical building blocks.
Yeah, the source material mentions she was using polyphenylene, terephthalate, and polybenzamide.
Which is a mouthful.
It is. But let's translate that out of the jargon.
Yeah.
She is basically working with molecules designed to interlock tightly, right? Specifically, a class of polymers called aramids.
Yes. So her lab work was supervised by a research fellow named Paul W. Morgan, and he had mathematically calculated that these specific aramids should form incredibly stiff fibers.
Okay.
The reason comes down to their molecular structure. Standard polymers, like the ones used in plastic bags, have molecular chains that are flexible.
Flexible.
Think of them like long strands of cooked spaghetti. They bend and fold easily.
Right.
But aramids contain bulky benzene rings within their chains.
So instead of cooked spaghetti, those bulky benzene rings act more like rigid interlocking Lego bricks. Like a stiff backbone that physically prevents the molecular chain from bending.
That is exactly the right visualization. That stiffness is where the strength comes from.
Okay, I'm tracking.
But there was a massive physical hurdle. To turn a polymer into a usable fiber, you typically have to melt it down and stretch it out.
Right.
The scientific standard for melt condensation polymerization at the time required heating the materials to over 200 degrees Celsius, which is nearly 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, wow. But because these aramids had that stiff, rigid Lego brick structure, they wouldn't melt properly, would they?
No, they wouldn't. The extreme heat required to melt them actually degraded the polymer, producing fibers that were weak and brittle.
So the normal process was literally destroying the thing they were trying to make.
Exactly. Which forced Kwolek to abandon the standard high-heat method entirely. She began pioneering lower temperature processes, bringing the temperature drastically down to between 0 and 40 degrees Celsius.
That is a massive drop.
Huge. She wasn't melting them anymore. She was trying to dissolve them into a liquid solution at roughly room temperature.
And this is where her willingness to embrace the weirdness of experimentation clashes head-on with the rigid rules of traditional science.
Oh, completely.
Because the solution she creates using this low-temperature process looks completely wrong. I actually want to read the exact quote from a speech she gave in 1993 because it paints such a vivid picture of this moment.
Go for it.
She said, quote, "The solution was unusually low viscosity, turbid, sterile-opalescent, and buttermilk in appearance. Conventional polymer solutions are usually clear or translucent and have the viscosity of molasses, more or less."
We really have to break down what she was saying in that beaker.
Yeah, please do.
So standard polymers melted down into a thick, clear syrup. What she had created was a thin, watery, cloudy liquid that looked literally like spoiled milk.
Yuck.
Yeah. And when she says it was stir-opalescent, she means that when she stirred this watery sludge, it shimmered slightly, almost like a pearl.
Okay, why was it shimmering?
That shimmering was actually those rigid, rod-like molecules briefly aligning with each other in the current of the liquid.
That is wild. But in a 1960s corporate chemistry lab, nobody cared about a subtle shimmer, did they?
Not at all. A cloudy, watery solution meant one thing: a failed experiment.
The standard operating procedure, without question, was to dump a cloudy solution down the drain and start over.
It was considered garbage.
Let's visualize this for a second. The standard scientific process is like melting sugar to make a nice, clear, hard candy. Everyone in the kitchen knows exactly what the syrup is supposed to look like.
Right, nice and clear.
But Kwolek does her low-temperature process.
Yeah.
And her pot is full of this opaque, weird, watery sludge. Everyone else is telling her she ruined the batch.
Yeah.
But she looks at the sludge and realizes it is entirely filterable through a fine pore filter. She decides she wants to see what happens if they try to spin it into a fiber anyway.
Which brings her to a massive wall of institutional resistance.
Yeah, the spinneret.
Right. To turn any liquid polymer into a solid thread, you have to force it through a machine called a spinneret. It's essentially a metal plate full of microscopic holes, much like a shower head.
Okay.
But the operators of the spinneret machine explicitly refuse to process her solution.
Because they looked at her cloudy buttermilk and assumed all those undissolved particles were going to immediately clog the microscopic holes and ruin their expensive equipment.
Exactly.
And this part of the story always fascinates me because it shatters a common myth about science. We like to think of science as this purely objective, data-driven enterprise where the best ideas just automatically win.
Oh, definitely.
But Kevlar was born almost entirely out of interpersonal persuasion. Institutional rules actively prevented her from generating the data she needed.
It highlights that innovation is deeply social and political. I mean, objective data is useless if the bureaucracy won't let you run the test.
Seriously.
Kwolek had to persuade the technician who ran the spinneret, Charles Smullen, to break protocol, ignore the standard assumptions, and test her cloudy solution anyway.
And she does it. She gets them to bend the rules. They load the buttermilk into the spinneret. And we need a functional metaphor here to understand what happens next.
Okay.
If those bulky aramid molecules are like stiff, rigid logs, the spinneret acts like a narrow river channel.
That is the perfect mechanism to describe it. In the cloudy liquid, all those microscopic logs are jumbled up, pointing in random directions.
Right.
But as that liquid is forced under immense pressure through the microscopic holes of the spinneret, physics takes over. The sheer force of passing through that narrow channel physically forces all of those rod-like molecules to snap into alignment, pointing in the exact same direction.
Like forcing a massive log jam through a narrow canyon, they all have to line up parallel to make it through.
Exactly. And because they are aligned perfectly parallel, they form incredibly dense hydrogen bonds between the molecular chains.
Wow.
When that aligned fiber comes out the other side of the machine, the result is an absolute paradigm shift. When they tested the thread, it didn't snap like nylon. This new liquid crystal polymer, the first one ever prepared, by the way, was incredibly stiff.
It was 5 times stronger than steel by weight. 5 times.
Yeah.
From the exact same buttermilk solution that the entire scientific establishment would have poured down the drain.
And she even figured out shortly after that if she heat-treated the spun fibers, they became even stronger.
That's just amazing.
DuPont immediately recognized the magnitude of what she had discovered. The material was commercially introduced as Kevlar in 1971, and DuPont assigned a massive group of senior managers and researchers to rapidly commercialize it.
The applications just grew exponentially. I mean, it currently has over 200 distinct uses. We are talking parachute lines, airplane fuselage components, lightweight boats.
It's everywhere.
It is used in building materials to reinforce structures against bombs and hurricane-force winds. You find it in firefighter boots, hockey sticks, cut-resistant gloves for chefs. The unibody of the Motorola Droid RAZR cell phone was backed with Kevlar.
Oh, I remember that phone. But its legacy, without a doubt, is cemented in lightweight body armor for military and police personnel.
Right, going back to that World War II problem.
Exactly. Kwolek solved that mid-century physics problem. The material was finally light enough to be woven into a vest that could be worn comfortably on patrol. But the aligned molecular structure was strong enough to catch a speeding bullet like a baseball in a mitt, basically dispersing the kinetic energy across the fibers.
The scale of that impact is staggering. According to the source material, during the week of Stephanie Kwolek's death in June 2014, the 1 millionth bullet-resistant vest made with Kevlar was sold.
1 million.
1 million vests. That translates to an incalculable number of lives saved.
It really does.
But there's a massive catch to this incredible success story that, honestly, modern listeners might find a bit jarring. Kevlar generated billions of dollars in revenue for DuPont. Billions. And Kwolek's financial cut of that revenue was zero.
Yeah. She signed over the Kevlar patent entirely to the company. She never received a single royalty check or profited directly from the sales of the products her invention made possible.
I try to put myself in those shoes, and it is genuinely hard to fathom. You invent a material that fundamentally changes global manufacturing, generates billions, and you don't get a percentage.
It sounds wild today, but we really have to view this through the structural reality of corporate research and development.
Okay, fair point.
This was, and largely still is, the standard model. You are a salaried employee. The corporation provides the multi-million-dollar laboratory, the expensive chemical precursors, the technicians like Charles Smullen, and the massive commercialization apparatus.
Right, they fund the whole sandbox.
Exactly. So in exchange for absorbing all the financial risk of the thousands of experiments that fail, the company owns the patents for the one experiment that succeeds.
I mean, it makes structural sense, even if it feels unbalanced in hindsight, given the sheer scale of Kevlar's success. But what is truly illuminating to me is that Kwolek herself did not harbor bitterness about the financial arrangement.
No, her internal reward system was calibrated completely differently. She stayed at DuPont for her entire 40-year career, eventually filing 28 different patents. And in 1995, she was awarded the company's Lavoisier Medal for outstanding technical achievement.
Which is a huge deal.
To understand how exclusive that was, she was the only female employee in the history of the company to receive that honor until the year 2021.
That is wild.
But beyond the medals, she stated repeatedly that knowing her inventions saved lives brought her immense, profound satisfaction.
It is an incredible full-circle realization. She originally wanted to go to medical school to save lives as a physician, right?
Exactly.
She ended up saving exponentially more lives as a chemist than she ever could have treating patients in a clinic.
It's beautiful, really.
It is. And she didn't just stop when she left the lab. She retired from her research position in 1986, but she shifted her intense focus from engineering materials to engineering the minds of the next generation.
She became a deeply passionate advocate for increasing women's participation in STEM.
Which she knew a lot about.
Oh, she understood firsthand the isolation and the institutional hurdles of being a woman in a male-dominated scientific field in the mid-20th century. She consulted, she served on the National Academy of Sciences, and she spent countless hours directly mentoring students.
She actually used one of her very first award-winning discoveries to captivate those students, especially young girls. Back in 1959, she published a paper outlining a demonstration called the nylon rope trick.
That is a brilliant piece of visual chemistry. Have you seen it?
I have. It demonstrates a method for producing high molecular weight nylon in a simple beaker at room temperature. You basically have two distinct layers of clear liquids in a glass.
Right.
You reach in with a pair of tweezers to the interface where the two liquids meet, and you just start pulling up a continuous, solid string of nylon. You can pull yards and yards of it out of a small beaker.
It looks like magic.
It really does. And she would take this experiment into grade school classrooms to show kids the tangible magic of chemistry. You think about the young girl in Pennsylvania, sitting in that crowded, shared classroom, gathering data from the older kids.
Oh, yeah.
And in her later years, she is going back into those same kinds of classrooms to ensure young girls know they absolutely belong in the scientific community.
Her legacy is firmly cemented in both the physical materials she created and the cultural barriers she dismantled. The accolades she accumulated are just staggering.
Like what?
Well, the Chemical Pioneer Award, for one. In 1995, she became only the fourth woman ever added to the National Inventors Hall of Fame.
Wow.
She received the National Medal of Technology, and she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 2003.
And then in 2019, Time magazine undertook a project to create retroactive Woman of the Year covers, starting from 1920, basically to correct the historical oversight of their Man of the Year tradition.
Right.
They chose Stephanie Kwolek as the definitive Woman of the Year for 1966. On top of that, the Royal Society of Chemistry named a biennial award after her, the Stephanie L. Kwolek Award, recognizing exceptional contributions to materials chemistry.
And she remained intellectually engaged, writing about science education right up until she passed away at the age of 90.
Her story fundamentally changes how we should view the process of discovery, I think.
It proves that the most important data point in an experiment isn't always the one you set out to find.
Right.
Often, it is the anomaly you were told to ignore.
Which brings us entirely back to you, the listener. Kwolek's life proves that sometimes the exact solution you're hunting for does not look the way you expected it to.
Not at all.
You might be striving for a clear, pristine, easily understandable outcome, and the actual answer shows up looking like cloudy, unpromising buttermilk.
Yeah.
If you blindly follow the standard operating procedures, you will wash your greatest breakthrough down the drain.
It requires the courage to trust your own observation over the consensus of the room and the interpersonal skill to persuade the gatekeepers to let you test your weird idea.
So as you go back to your own projects today, consider this. Kwolek's discovery relied heavily on a physical, messy anomaly in a beaker. But today, we live in an era where artificial intelligence and supercomputers can simulate millions of chemical compounds and structural designs in a matter of seconds, discarding the suboptimal ones before they ever exist in the physical world.
It's a completely different landscape.
It is. As our systems become optimized to instantly filter out the errors, have we engineered out the possibility of beautiful mistakes? In a world of perfect simulations, will we ever be allowed to have another buttermilk moment, or has innovation become too sterile for serendipity?
That is a great question to leave on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life of Stephanie Kwolek. Keep questioning the consensus, look closer at the messy details, and we will see you next time.